You're listening to Procurement 6, the weekly podcast from the team at Art of Procurement that summarizes this week in procurement in just 6 short segments.
Hi there, I'm Kelly Barner, and today is Friday, March 24th, 2023.
6.
This week's Procurement 6 is brought to you by the Art of Procurement company page on LinkedIn. If you usually meet us in a podcast listening app, well, first of all, thank you for listening. But you may be missing out on our content, news, and events that are in other forms. Be sure to follow Art of Procurement on LinkedIn. That's where you can vote in our regular Snap polls, learn about upcoming live sessions, and join the ongoing conversation with the rest of the procurement community.
5.
In this week's Art of Procurement podcast, Philip Eidson and I celebrated hitting 1 million downloads with a behind-the-scenes kind of Q&A. If you've ever been curious about what it is actually like to work at Art of Procurement, or what it is like behind the scenes producing a podcast, this episode will give you a pretty good idea. And let me tell you, it isn't all fun and games. Sometimes we get, let's just say, colorful feedback about our content. One of the questions I took this opportunity to ask Phil is about what it's like to get such feedback and how he handles it. Let's listen.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the early days it was really hard because in the early days I just took it all personally.
Yeah.
And I would say because I felt that I come to this from such a genuine place of trying to help people, in those early couple of years of the podcast, that if people were pushing back, I remember very specifically in the first year there was somebody who again was well known in the procurement community out of the UK who would push back that in a way that suggested that my intentions were, not the best of intentions or something like that. And it's like, how can somebody think that? So that those will be difficult, early days.
Yeah.
I've learned to, to realize that there's two things when I think about feedback, and negative feedback. Sometimes it's valid. I think that we would be hypocrites on the things that we talk about in terms of, encouraging procurement teams to go and get feedback, because that's really the basis of any change. If we didn't solicit feedback ourselves and then, do what we can to act on that. So there's definitely a feedback that's negative that may be warranted because for whatever reasons we haven't had the resources to do something, or something with the tech failed, or, the tech that we used doesn't enable us to do things that we'd like to do, or whatever. And there's other things that, that's just the way it's designed to be.
Yeah.
And that the negative feedback may just be that maybe we're not the right person for you. And so you kind of have to differentiate where that feedback is something that you can truly act on because that's part of ultimately the plan of what we want to try and do in the vision, or whether it's just because we've designed it in a certain way and it's going to continue to be designed that way. And, there's just a reason for us doing it that not everybody may like.
As the saying goes, only a hypocrite is liked by everyone. Now, it doesn't make it any easier to get negative feedback, but when you're trying to create the best content you can, you are signing up for some amount of that. Luckily, the vast majority of the feedback we get is positive, and even the more critical responses are at least well-intentioned. You can find this week's podcast at artofprocurement.com/podcast or using the link in this week's show notes. And if you do have feedback, you can email it to me directly at kelly@artofprocurement.com. Both positive and constructive thoughts are welcome.
4.
A couple of weeks ago, I was invited by Supply Chain Brief to present a webinar on supply chain risk and resilience. I used that opportunity to delve into some recent news stories that I think exist in the space between, the place where it is not clear what the right thing to do is. It also gave me the opportunity to consider things that resilient thinkers do and do not say, whether out loud or in their own minds. Things like, well, all we have to do is, or, oh, you just have to. Even absolutist statements like, well, then we'll just source everything locally, can be a problem when you're trying to build resilience. If you're interested in reading more or watching the whole webinar, you'll find it linked in today's show notes and on the Art of Procurement website.
This is Procurement 6 from Art of Procurement. To get notified every time an episode is published, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe. 3.
Art of Procurement recently ran a LinkedIn Snap poll to get your input on the following question. Which procurement operating model does your team use? The results, in order of the vote tally, are centralized, 45%, center-led, 33%, decentralized, 14%, and matrixed, 9%. Now that gives us a snapshot, but how have those percentages changed over time, and how are they likely to change going forward? On March 29th, join us as we host Jake Taylor from Procurability in an AOP Live session. He will share his thoughts on these poll results and discuss the many considerations and implications associated with different procurement operating models. You'll find a link to register in today's show notes.
2.
In this week's episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast, I had the opportunity to share a recent conversation I had with David Meltzer. David is the co-founder of Sports One Marketing, a consultant and business coach, a keynote speaker, a 3-time best-selling author. He was also the CEO of the Lee Steinberg Sports and Entertainment Agency. Now, if that doesn't ring a bell, that's okay, but let me tell you this. That is the real-life firm that served as the inspiration for the movie Jerry Maguire. Remember that? Show me the money! That is the firm where he was the CEO. David's mission is to, quote, make a lot of money, help a lot of people, and have a lot of fun, which sounds like a great combination to me. But more importantly, and where we focus in this conversation, are his opinions on gratitude. How grateful we feel, even in the toughest times, can keep us grounded, can help us connect with the important people in our lives, and can keep us moving forward. I thoroughly enjoyed his passion, and his conviction is very clear. You can hear the entire episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts, or using the direct episode link in today's show notes.
1.
Before I let you go, I want to share some news about an upcoming event here at Art of Procurement. We are running an industry deep dive focused on the financial services industry. Andrew Thomas, a solutions consultant at Evalua, and Ilana Eltson, a managing director in consulting at KPMG, will join us live on April 11th to talk about the tension between cost reduction and risk management. Register today using the link in the show notes, and then join us live on April 11th.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next Friday at 6 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. If you've enjoyed this pod, help us grow and tell your peers to search for Procurement 6 wherever they get their podcasts.